So this talk continues my GED Social Studies US History section. In the first two videos, we had Christopher Columbus discovering the New World in 1492, the first settlers coming, the settlers growing in number, growing in colonies. We finished 13 colonies with the English stretching from New England all the way down to Georgia. The colonists originally really quite loyal to Britain, depending on Britain. This was the country they traded with, the country they were from, sharing culture, sharing religion with them. But as these colonies become more independent and wealthier, they start to need Britain less. At the same time as Britain's empire is growing, noticing the increasing wealth coming out of America, it's an opportunity for them to tax the colonists. The colonists don't send representatives to British Parliament. They don't have any say in the laws and the taxes that are imposed on them. And they begin with their independence to resent the British and eventually to call for a desire to be independent from Britain and not have these taxes imposed on them. Hence the American Revolution, the War of Independence, begins, a war that is eventually successful for the colonists. And so we begin the talk today with the revolution having started. The Congress meets again in May 1775 for their second Continental Congress. So delegates from the 13 colonies meet together in Philadelphia. They appoint a commander of their army, George Washington, who goes on to become the first president of the US. The next year, the British army withdraws from Boston. At the same time, a man called Thomas Paine, who had originally arrived from England, wrote a document called Common Sense, in which he argues that actually Americans should be given independence. The colonists, resenting the taxes and laws imposed on them that they have no say over, were inspired by a document called the Magna Carta. This is important in GED. The Magna Carta was actually signed in 1215, so you're looking at more than 500 years before this revolution. And in the document, it gives people certain rights and rights to have representative government, which is going to give taxation. The Americans felt they had no representative for them. And that they felt that they were due all the rights that are given in the Magna Carta. Here is a picture of King John signing the Magna Carta in the year 1215. In this Second Continental Congress, where George Washington is appointed the head of the new Continental Army, the American Army, the delegates from the 13 colonies agreed that they needed to be self-governing. And a man called Thomas Jefferson, a very famous person at this time, composed something called the Declaration of Independence. And in this Declaration of Independence, he gave all the reasons why they wanted to break from the government of Britain. And this declaration was agreed by Congress. And to Americans, it's a very important date, the 4th of July, 1776, because for them, it's the day that their nation was born. The United States was born. There is a picture of Thomas Jefferson. Now, not everyone agreed with this Declaration of Independence. There were a minority of Americans who still wanted British rule. They were called loyalists. There weren't that many of them, probably 1 in 5, but they did exist. The battle started. You don't need to know the details of the War of Independence. for your social studies GED. Let it be said that despite the fact the English army was bigger, they lost in the end. There were quite a lot of battles across America. The French gave the Americans a helping hand. The French and the English are often at war with each other, so perhaps it was an opportunity for France to get back at Britain. And then in 1781, the British surrendered at Yorktown after losing a big battle there. And in 1783, at the Treaty of Paris, they gave independence to the United States. The United States was a lot smaller in 1783 than it is today. With my very untidy blue line, you can see that segment along the east coast of America where these 13 colonies, now to be called 13 states, are. That is the America of 1783. And it grew from there, but that's how it started. These 13 states had grown out of very different independent colonies. In each colony, they had their own form of government, their own ways of doing things that they were fiercely loyal to. So while these 13 colonies wanted to become one country, they also wanted to keep a lot of the powers of those colonies, in many respects, all the powers of those colonies together. So there was quite a battle between how much power should be given to central government and how much power should still reside in these colonies. The first government was drawn up under something called the Articles of Confederation, which was a document that these 13 colonies signed, we're now going to call them states, signed to say, okay, this is how the new country will work. The problem with these Articles of Confederation is that the way that the new country was supposed to work gave so much power to each individual colony and so little power to central government, it actually couldn't work very well. Some things are fine for the colonies to run, but other things, in other respects, there's something that the central government really has to have control. Matters like defence and trade and paying for defence really require some power within central government. And the states reluctantly realised that they needed to think again and to build a new system of government that gives a little bit more power to central government. And in 1787, they met again and then created something called the Constitution of the United States, which was finally adopted in 1789. It still exists today, the US Constitution, and it's the oldest government constitution still in use in the world. The point of this document was to build a power balance, the recognition that you needed to have some strength in central government, but also to maintain power among the states that the people were fiercely loyal to. Concerns about power of central government, not only limiting power by giving power to the states, but also within central government, dividing it into three separate branches. The executive, which is the president and the leadership within the president's office. Legislative, which is parliament. And finally, judicial, which are the judges. And these are three separate branches that can work with or against each other to make sure that there are important balances there. The central government would deal with nationwide issues like defence and trade, but in other respects, the state governments would remain strong. This battle between how strong you want central government to be and how strong you want the state governments to be defined really between federalists and anti-federalists. And in this argument about the US Constitution and how the US Constitution should work, you had these two different players. On the federalist camp, the federalists wanted central government to be strong, and that the states should really could combine themselves much more into one. And one of the most famous federalists is a man called Alexander Hamilton. There were other people who we call anti-federalists, and they wanted the states to have as much power as possible. Thomas Jefferson was an anti-federalist. What the anti-federalists were worried about was that the Constitution was going to build a central government that was going to be too strong, and that this strong central government would threaten the power of the states and also the rights of individuals. Central government could become much more for the rich, and as a result, the Constitution needed to be amended to make sure that lots of these rights were protected. So there were 10 amendments that were made to the Constitution, which we call the Bill of Rights. This is really important stuff. In GED, the US Constitution is a big part of the exam. And these 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, are also a very important part of the exam. What the Bill of Rights did is it gave people certain freedoms, like free speech, religious freedom, proper justice. They limited the power of central government and even allowed people to own their own guns, something that still exists in America today. Slavery was not even discussed at that stage. It becomes much more of an issue later on, but at this stage not discussed. Here is a gun store in the US today. This part of the Bill of Rights that citizens should be allowed to own firearms is still there today, and because it's part of the Bill of Rights, it's something that people are loath to change. Slavery, at the time of independence, slavery is starting to grow quite dramatically. You can see 1780, over 500,000 slaves in America, and that grows over the next 80 years. So by 1860, you're looking at 4 million slaves. This creates a big issue in America going forward, as you'll see. The slaves are mainly in the South. And the reason that they're mainly in the South is this is where a lot of the big plantations, the big agricultural farmlands are, tobacco, cotton, etc. These plantations required slavery to man them. Notice how that oval has gone much further west. As America starts to expand after independence, those 13 colonies expand westward until obviously eventually they take over all of what the USA is today. George Washington, first president of the USA, he signed the first US Constitution and became the first president of the USA. He came from Virginia. He was actually, you remember the House of Burgesses in Jamestown? He was a member of the House of Burgesses, a very successful general, and perhaps key too to him being appointed as the first president. He was neither a federalist nor an anti-federalist, so he could talk to both camps. Some of the other famous names you've seen Thomas Jefferson mentioned, the person who wrote the Declaration of Independence. I've also mentioned Alexander Hamilton was one of the Federalists. Thomas Jefferson was an anti-federalist. Alexander Hamilton also created the US financial system. There is a famous musical that some of you may have heard of called Hamilton, that is named after Alexander Hamilton. A couple of other famous people here: Benjamin Franklin, great scientist, diplomat, statesman, and general thinker. James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution and father of the Bill of Rights. You don't need to know details about these people. I'm just giving you their names because in your GED test, you well might find that something comes up related to them. It could be a speech they've given. It could be a passage of writing that they've written. But that's who they are. France. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but France was on the side of the Americans during the revolution. Once the revolution was over, the relations break down a bit. France has got its own issues with the French Revolution. They're short of money. They ask for money from the US, who refuse to pay it. And so the friendship ends, and there's actually a short war between the US and France, not a particularly important war. You don't really need to know much about this for GED. And again, with Britain, they have independence from Britain, but the relationship is quite a fractious one. Britain is accused of seizing ships and sailors. They're accused of helping the Indian tribes, as the American colonists are spreading west, and the Indians are resisting their spread west. The colonists accuse the British of actually helping the Indian tribes. In the end, a treaty is signed, but some Americans approve, some Americans don't approve. America starts to expand, and you can see particularly that the light pink line is America 1805, and then expanding westwards. Louisiana Territory, Indiana Territory, Mississippi Territory. It starts to expand westward really quite quickly. Let's go on to some questions. First question relates to the major battles of the American Revolution. As I've said, in GED, you don't need to learn about all these battles. If you get a question about battles, they'll probably give you the information, and then they're going to ask you to interpret it. That's what you're going to have here. You've got a list here of major battles of the American Revolution, their names, their dates, and who the American commander is. And then you're going to get asked questions on this table. And the questions are all about your ability to interpret the table and understand the table so you can answer the question correctly. Let's look at the question, and then we'll come back to the table. The major battles of the Revolution lasted for approximately how many years? Let's go back to the table. Well, the major battles started in 1775, April 1775, and they ended in September 1781. So that looks to me like the correct answer would be, how many years? 6 years. Question 2, during which year did the greatest number of major battles take place? So you go back to the table and go through the years and say, okay, which year has the most battles? Well, in 1775, they look like there are 3. In 1776, it looks like there are 3. In 1777, it looks like there are rather more than 1, 2, 3, 4. In 1777, there are 5. In 1778, 1. 1779, 1. 1780, 1. And 1781, 1. So I think the answer there is 1777. And question number 3, during the Battle of Trenton, Who commanded the American forces? So let's go to the table and look for the Battle of Trenton. Battles: Lexington, Bunker, Quebec, Long Island, White Plains, Trenton, December 26th, 1776, Battle of Trenton, and the general is General George Washington. So the answer to question 3 is General George Washington. So you see from that you don't need to know all the details of the battles. It's all given to you. In order to score 3 out of 3 in this GED question, you simply need to be able to interpret the table. Example question 2. The preamble to the US Constitution begins with the words, "We are the people." Which of the following is indicated by these words? And A, rights are guaranteed to certain people. B, the people who wrote the documents are powerful. C, the power of the government comes from the people. And D, some people deserve to be given more rights than others. Well, we are the people it's not for certain people. It's for all people. The people who wrote the document are powerful. No, it's not about the people who wrote the document. They're referring to the people, the people of America. C, the power of the government comes from the people. That sounds like it makes sense. Let's have a look at 4. Some people deserve to be given more rights than others, but it's certainly not about that. So the preamble to this, "We are the people," is all about the power of the government comes from the people. Which group wanted a Bill of Rights to be included in the Constitution? A, Federalists, B, Anti-Federalists, C, Senators, and D, Representatives. So here you need to, and to an extent the question before the preamble, you need to have some history of America. So that preamble, getting to the answer C is the correct one. The power of the government comes from the people, is all about a people who had government imposed on them from Britain. No say. The people wanted a say. The US Constitution creates this government where the people have the right to vote, have the right to say. So feeling very much that the power of the government comes from the people. There's this next question about the Bill of Rights and how it comes to be included. You do need to remember a little bit about the history of it and this concern that with the Constitution that central government is in danger of becoming extremely powerful unless there are some amendments to it that give rights to the individuals. And there were 2 groups of people when the Constitution was being built: the Federalists, including Alexander Hamilton, and the Anti-Federalists, including Thomas Jefferson. The Federalists wanted strong central government. The Anti-Federalists were really worried about strong central government because it might reduce freedoms of the people, and they wanted to put in this Bill of Rights that would create protection. So the group that wanted a Bill of Rights were the Anti-Federalists. Senators and representatives is an aside. It's got nothing to do with Bill of Rights. Next question. Here you have an example of an old document. So there's Thomas Jefferson, Anecdotes of Benjamin Franklin. Thomas Jefferson is the person who wrote the Constitution. And Benjamin Franklin didn't want to do it. And here you have Thomas Jefferson's Anecdotes of Benjamin Franklin. I'll just read it now. Again, it's very old English. You might find it difficult to understand, but if you are aware of the history of the time, it might be a little bit easier. Thomason, I have made it a rule, said he, whenever in my power, to avoid becoming the draftsman of papers to be reviewed by a public body. I took my lesson from an incident which I will relate to you. When I was a journeyman printer, one of my companions, an apprentice hatter, was about to open shop for himself. His first concern was to have a handsome signboard with a proper inscription. He composed it in these words: John Thompson, hatter, makes and sells hats for ready money, with a figure of a hat subjoined. But he thought he would submit it to his friends for their amendments. The first he showed it to thought the word hatter tautologous, because followed by the words make hats, which show that he was a hatter, it was struck out. The next observed that the word makes might as well be omitted, because his customers would not care who made the hats. If good into their mind, they would buy whomsoever made. He struck it out. A third said he thought the words for ready money were useless, as it was not the custom of the place to sell on credit. Everyone who purchased expected to pay. They were parted with, and the inscription now stood, John Thompson sells hats. Sells hats, said his next friend. Why, nobody will expect you to give them away. What then is the use of that word? It was stricken out, and hats followed it. The rather, as there was one painted on the board, so his inscription was reduced ultimately to John Thompson, with the figure of a hat subjoined. What was the message that Franklin wanted to convey by telling his story? A, he wanted to be a hatter, not a writer. B, he recognized the fact that he was not a skilled writer. C, he believed his apprentice should write the document. Or D, he believed that no matter what he wrote in the document, someone would change it. Well, I don't think it's A. It's not about him wanting to be a hatter, not a writer. It's about this is about, well, getting asked to do something and whether actually this is a sensible thing for you to do or not. He recognized the fact that he was not a skilled writer. Perhaps. C, he believed that his apprentice should write the document. Well, he doesn't mention that anywhere. So, or D, he believed that no matter what he wrote in the document, someone would change it. Well, I think it's D. Okay, he may say he's not a skilled writer, but actually what he's really saying there is everyone's going to want to make changes. So I'm going to get someone else to do it. I think the answer to this question is D. So this is all about your understanding of, in the beginning of America, everyone wants things that are slightly different. And he doesn't want to write something because he knows it's going to get changed. And your understanding of America and all these fights between federalists and anti-federalists, and states wanting power and central government wanting power, you're on a hiding to nothing. So I think it's D is what it's about. To get that question right, you need to have an understanding of the history, and which makes reading that document, a document written a long, long time ago in a very different form of English to what you're used to, a little bit easier to do. We're now going to move on in the next class to the War of 1812 with England and the events leading up to and including the Civil War.